I did want to ask you about Bert Hinkler, actually, because I think, as I understand it, Bert and Charles Kingsford Smith were only about 3 years apart in age, both Queensland born, and both died tragically in plane accidents and disasters. What was their relationship? Were they rivals?
As near as I could reckon it, they met once. And that was one night in London in December of 1931 when they both happened to be there. And I must say with Hinkler, as I'm going through, a common theme of a lot of these pilots was they were very free with their sexual favours, not their favours, but they were very liberal sexually. They were a bad man to be around on a Saturday night if you're an attractive woman, okay, or a good man to be around. And as I'm going through, none of them were particularly worried about their marriage vows as they went along. And I had two standouts as I went along. One was Bert Hinkler and Charles Lindbergh. I thought, you know, good old Bert. He loved Nancy, Nancy loved him. I'll be all right, Nancy, I love you, Bert. And he flies away. Bert held out, and then I'm getting through research, and you get to the end. When Bert died, Bert hit a mountaintop in Italy, and Nancy's, kissed him goodbye. And it turned out Bert Hinkler had married somebody else 6 months earlier in Connecticut, was a bigamist. And you go, oh, and I thought, well, at least I've got Charles Lindbergh. At least Charles Lindbergh will stay true, because Lindbergh wrote this, he said these things. He basically said, held his nose, and these Saturday night boys, I believe in proper breeding, I believe in correct breeding, Good old Lindbergh, with the same woman for all those years. And then it turns out, near the end of last century, well, in the late 90s, this German woman, a young German woman, is going through her mother's papers, just happens to come across these letters. And she sees a photo of the American man she knows who is her father, that had visited her, when they were kids, 3 times a year. And she sees a magazine article about Charles Lindbergh. And she says to her mother, "Is he our father?" And she says, yes, he is, but don't tell anybody until I've died. So he was the father of the young woman and her brother and sister, so those 3. But then it turned out Lindbergh was also the father. This woman, he had an affair with this woman and had 3 children. He'd also had an affair with her sister and had 2 children, and also with their best friend and had another 2 children. Lindbergh, between 59 and 65, had fathered 7 children in Germany. Just staggering.
So, and have we got any revelations about Kingsford Smith? Are you going to sully his copybook?
Certainly not sully his copybook, but somebody told me that look, if I had been in his situation and I had come and I was in that First World War, I don't think I would have kept any chastity vows, and none of them did. Just about none of them in that First World War, with the notable exception of my grandfather and your grandfather, as far as I can see. But they were all, and see, all of those guys. I mean, one of the things from Lindbergh that I loved the quote where he said that 10 years of flying would be worth a whole lifetime of ordinary life. Basically, I'll likely die. Flying is, you're pretty much going to die, but if I can get 10 years in of flying, that'll be before I die, before I crash miserably and die, that would be worth a whole lifetime of dullness. And anyway, Lindbergh lived on and on and on. But a lot of them, part of the culture was, I may well die tomorrow. And they were right, because they may well have died tomorrow, and they were just about all of them. That's the way they lived. And why not?
It sounds like the book is full of such rich detail, and I think that's a fantastic thing, because so many of us know his name, and of course the landscape is littered with all these Charles Kingsford Smith references. And he was on the $20 note for a long time, but I don't think
Charles Kingsford Smith Airport.
Yes, I don't think that many people really know about him, and also how significant that period of time was for the development of Australia.
Yes. Well, this is another thing. Why is it? How is it that we had this guy? One of the things Lindbergh, when they met, Lindbergh and he met in late 1930, and Lindbergh came to his hotel room in New York, and Lindbergh made no bones about it. Before Lindbergh went on the famous New York to Paris flight, there were others that wanted to do it. There was a $25,000 prize. Who's the first person to fly to New York to Paris? And there were 4 gung-ho teams ready to go. And Lindbergh was this Johnny nobody from nowhere who said his plan was, I won't do it with a big crew, I'm not going to do it with a huge plane. I'm going to be one man in one plane, one set of wings, one engine, and one big petrol tank, which I'll be sitting behind and under. And that's the way he was going to do it. Anyway, it looked like the other crews were going to get ahead of him. So he wrote to his mother in Detroit and said, look, if this doesn't work, I'll fly the Pacific, which is a harder thing to do anyway. And he wrote to his mother about, flying the Atlantic, and she wrote back this wonderful line. She said, you know, "Dear Charles, I now realise that Christopher Columbus must also have had a mother." It's a brilliant line, and I've lost my train of thought somehow.
Yeah, I was asking you about the significance of that period of time.
Yes,
to
so that was
aviation.
it. So Lindbergh had acknowledged that flying the Pacific was a harder thing to do than to fly the Atlantic, even though Lindbergh did it on his own and Kingsford Smith did it with 3 others. But my point is, why is it that we had this guy, Kingsford Smith, who could fly further and longer than anybody else? Basically because he was from Australia. And so when he came back, after the First World War, there were all these pilots that had been flying everywhere. And they then went back to England, and they went back to France, and they went back to Germany, and they started flying. You know, they went from England to Liverpool, or they went from France from Paris to Marseille, little hops here and there. Kingsford Smith came back to Australia, and he went from Perth to Carnarvon, and Karratha, and he was doing these huge distances all the time because he was an Australian pilot in a vast nation where these huge distances had to be traversed by planes. So he got all this experience doing all these different things, and he became an extraordinary long-distance pilot.
Just one question, one last question I wanted to ask you. You mentioned very briefly before about the moon landing, and I wanted to ask you what your interest is in that, and whether there's the makings of another book for you there.
I have an idea. Look, one idea that I have, as I say, I started out writing about Kingsford Smith. I started doing the history of aviation and all these extraordinary flights. I think there's a great book to be done, the 15 most significant flights in history, or the 21 most significant flights in history. And, you'd finish it off with the moon landing. I mean, one of the things that I've been doing this documentary for the BBC on the moon landing, and just over the last 3 weeks about the Australian involvement in it. There's only 12 men that have set foot on the moon. And the stunning thing is, so when they get up there, July 21st, 1969, Australia was July 21st, America was July 20, I don't know what it was on the moon. Probably never thought to ask. But anyway, when they did it, there was this sense of, well, this is Apollo 11. Look, there'll be Apollo 67, by the year 2000. We're just going to keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And the world was stunned that you could get a man on the moon, rightly so. 3 years later, stop, that's enough now, we've done it. And it all stopped, and all these Australian technicians and scientists who were into it, they thought they had the next 30 years of their life putting people on the moon. And by 1972, all over, because once they'd done it, what then do you do?
So there is an Australian story in the moon landing?
Absolutely. The first, I'm up on it because I've been doing 3 weeks of shooting a documentary. First 7 minutes of the landing, the television came through Honeysuckle Creek down just west of Canberra, Tidbinbilla, and then I went to Parkes on the dish. I was on the dish yesterday, walking around on the dish, which reminds me of my book, Kingsford Smith. Please get it from Booktopia. Thank you for having me. I've had a lovely time.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Bye-bye.